is the All Things Strange podcast. I am your host, Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, the paranormal, and all things strange. You can find all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find our Discord, our Patreon, our merchandise, and more. This week's episode, the Fort Dix Alien. Fort McGuire / Dix. I don't mean, like Dirty Dicks or anything. It's spelled D-I-X. So don't blame me for your dirty thoughts. Before we get started, we've got 2 wonderful tiers of patronage for you. The first tier will get you early access and bonus episodes. The second tier will get you the ability to vote on upcoming topics such as this one. And don't miss our Discord, where you can hang out and chat with other fans of the show and the hosts sometimes when they're available. Usually it's just me in there, but once in a while somebody else will drop in. All right, well, let's get right to it. This one was requested and voted upon by our listeners. The Fort Dix / McGuire Air Force Base alien encounter of January 18th, 1978. And this is in Burlington County, New Jersey, on the east coast of the United States. For those of you not familiar with U.S. geography, for our international listeners, the state of New Jersey is a little bit south of New York. So most people are familiar with New York. They know where New York is and Los Angeles, and then everything else is maybe, right? That's where everybody knows those 2 places, I'm guessing, though. So anyways, it's not that far from New York City. Now, these 2 bases are right next to each other. They kind of share the same space, and that's why they are both lumped in to this encounter. It's quite often called by one or the other, or both. It just depends on where you're looking. A lot of the information for this case comes to us from Leonard Stringfield, who was a UFO researcher and did a tremendous amount of work in the areas of crashed retrievals. That was kind of his specialty, although he did lots of other stuff. And to be honest, he's a guy who kind of deserves his own episode. Just reading up on him a little bit to prepare for this particular case file, I thought to myself, some of these people really deserve their own episode. So I might do that at some point when I get a chance, for our bonus episode or something, maybe just do a biography of some important people within the realm or the history of ufology. But this week I have another topic I have in mind for the bonus episode. There was something that just happened recently. I was actually planning on doing a different topic for the bonus this week, but I saw on Reddit that a gentleman named Harold Malgren, Malgren, Harold Malgren, passed away recently, and he had sort of like a deathbed confession kind of a thing. He was interviewed, and he came out with some pretty wild claims before he unfortunately passed away. This is a pretty influential individual. He served under preliminary research on Google anyways, said he served under 5 U.S. presidents in their administrations. So he was one of these backroom players with a lot of influence, supposedly. I don't know. Haven't done the deep dive into it yet, and I don't know personally, I'm not super familiar with who this guy is. But I'm going to look into it for this week's bonus episode. And then the regularly scheduled bonus episode that I wanted to do this week, I'll probably do next week, unless something else grabs my attention. All right, let's get into it. This sighting took place in the early morning hours of January 18, 1978. There were, according to the witness, there were UFOs being seen in the area at the time. And we have a primary witness, pretty much just one witness for this that I could find, named Sergeant Jeff Morse, although that is a pseudonym. So he is reporting these things to Leonard Stringfield anonymously through him, basically. But Stringfield did talk to him and wrote letters back and forth for a number of years with our main witness. So Sergeant Jeff Morse was on duty at the time of the event. Although he himself did not shoot the alien, he was there when it happened. Were you there? I was not there, but Jeff Morse was. He personally saw as many as 12 UFOs, which were greenish blue lights flying around the skies and sometimes flying in formation. A Fort Dix military police officer was following one of the UFOs and reported that he was having radio troubles, and they assumed that the UFO was causing the radio troubles, although you never know, could just be a coincidence. Radio can be real spotty sometimes. So they think it was interference by the UFO. That's kind of the going theory on that. And by some accounts, a UFO actually hovered over this anonymous MP's car. While it was doing that, a 4-foot-tall being appeared in front of the MP's vehicle. It had a large head, a slender build, and grayish-brown skin, and it didn't appear to have any clothes on. The officer fired 5 times at the being with his .45 service revolver. Well, I'm guessing it's a revolver. I don't think I saw specifically what kind of gun it was, but I'm picturing an MP guy who's LARPing as a cowboy for Halloween, even though this didn't happen in Halloween. And he pulls out his revolver and he says, "Stick 'em up, you varmint." And then obviously the alien doesn't speak English, or creature, whatever it was, does not stick his hands up in the air, and he just says, "Blam!" Shoots at him 5 times, unclear how many times he hit. And he also shot at the UFO once. After this, the UFO shot up to join the other objects in the sky. There was about 11 of them up there at the time. Now, one thing I could not find out was, did he get out of his car and then shoot? Did he shoot while he was still in the car, just kind of leaning out of the window? Did he turn his car sideways and shoot out the window that way? I could not find that detail, and it's possible that detail was not related to Sergeant Jeff Morse. It's possible that all he knows is that he shot at it 5 times and once at the UFO. So the being ran away into the woods, where it climbed a fence to get into McGuire Air Force Base, and it made its way all the way to the end of runway number 5, where it collapsed and presumably died. Sergeant Morse and some other MPs were ordered to close off the area where the alien was. I'm just going to call it an alien. It's not a creature. Come on. What are we talking about here, right? This is what they're assuming here, is that this was some kind of extraterrestrial. So we'll just say it's an alien. Although sometimes, depending on the version of the story you look at, it's not called an alien. But that's what I'm going to do. So they closed off the area, and then they were told, after roping it off, that they were not allowed to go near the body. So Morse himself never got closer than 40 feet or so to the body, and he didn't see exact details like facial features or whether or not it had hands and feet and how many toes it had, that sort of thing. But he did get a look at it, and it looked like it had no hair. It had shiny, wet-looking skin like a reptile, and it wasn't wearing any clothes. Morse also noted the strong smell of ammonia, which is an interesting detail that has cropped up in a few other cases involving alien beings. That's not unique to this case. I have seen that in other places. Does that make the story more credible? Don't know, but it's just an interesting detail. At this point, some unknown blue beret men came and took over the crime scene, or the, was that a crime? Is it a crime to shoot an extraterrestrial? I don't know. Anyways, these mysterious blue berets were all at least sergeant rank or higher, and they did not wear any patches or insignia on their uniforms. Well, if that's the case, how did they know that they were sergeants if they didn't have any patches or insignia? Don't know. Anyways, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they just said, I'm a sergeant and you should salute me or something. Who knows? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Cotton Eye Joe? I don't know. Who knows? They came out of nowhere and went back to nowhere. Nobody knows where they came from. Did they have a mysterious Blue Beret force stationed on the McGuire Air Force Base because they arrived pretty quickly, or were they flown in from somewhere else on a fast airplane? No idea. At some point, a generator was brought in for extra lighting because it was still dark out, and armed guards were positioned around the perimeter of the closed-off area. The body at some point was sprayed with something, we don't know what, but witnesses saw it being sprayed, and then a wooden crate was built around it. It was then placed in a metal container. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base sent a C-141 cargo aircraft to retrieve the body and the crate that it was in. The officers or military police or anybody involved with this case were told not to speak of the incident or else they would face a lot of trouble. And 2 days after the event, Sergeant Morse and others were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and interrogated and intimidated by some scary dudes. They were once again told not to talk about the incident, and Morse signed a document swearing lifetime secrecy. Here's a quote from Morse. While there, we were all together except for actual interrogations. Mine had 2 men, one apparently a civilian with a pipe and beard who never spoke. At one point, there were 3 men. One played nice guy, one mean guy, and of course, the silent civilian. All they wanted to know was the nature of the incident, what I knew, and then told me about my duty to keep my mouth shut. I signed a form, and it is supposed to bind me for life. And just as an aside, Leonard Stringfield did give a description of J. Allen Hynek, who was active at this time, and Morse said, no, that wasn't him. The guy looked different than him. I sent him a picture or something. Morse remembered the names of the interrogation team. Apparently they were wearing badges with their names and rank, and their identities were later verified as people who actually did work for the Air Force or military, which gives the story a little bit more credence if he has actual names for the interrogators, and they had jobs that would make sense for that kind of a role. Except for one of the guys that was there was no record found of that guy in the military rosters that the researchers could find anyways, and it's suspected that he was from a different branch of the government, possibly CIA, but we don't know. No one at the interrogation apparently mentioned aliens or offered any explanation whatsoever for the incident. After the incident, all of the involved airmen were sent to different locations for reassignment, breaking up the band, so to speak. And I've seen this in a couple of other cases as well. For example, one of the sightings, I think for the 1966 flap, that was my first episode. I did see a little blurb that, I don't think I said it on the episode, but I did see a blurb for that case that after a sighting by military personnel, that they were all sent to different places. Sergeant Morse himself was reassigned to Okinawa, Japan. Stringfield filed Freedom of Information Act requests, but was told that military police reports were destroyed after 5 years, so there wouldn't be any record of the incident to corroborate Sergeant Morse's story. And to that I say, ha, 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 yeah, right. So if there's some extraordinary event like this, they wouldn't keep any record of it. They would just do the normal, okay, 5 years, time to destroy the report. Bye-bye, didn't happen. I don't think so. That doesn't make any sense. So if this is a real genuine event, they would still have some sort of record of the event for sure. 100%. Morse provided an incident complaint report, a military report, in other words, to Stringfield. It said that an unidentified body had been shot, and this document has not been verified, and the Air Force, in fact, said that it's fake. So the only source we have for this document is from the original witness, Morse himself. We have no corroboration whatsoever on this document. You can find it online. It's not easy to find. Try using the Wayback Machine for dead links. I did not find any active link with this report, but I did find a dead link with a PNG that was extremely poor quality and hard to read on the Wayback Machine. And, looking over it, it looks like a military document, but, I'm not an expert on these things. So you could also fake the document and it would fool me because I don't know anything about this stuff. So that is the case in a nutshell. I did find mention of another witness, which I will talk about later. But now let's get into a little bit more detail. So here are some excerpts from The Fatal Encounter at Fort Dix, McGuire, a Case Study. Status Report 4 by Leonard H. Stringfield. This talks about some of the background stuff, and I think that this is important for this case to kind of get an idea of how the information came around and how it was investigated by Leonard Stringfield. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read sections of it. And I just want to say that from what I've read, everything I've read, Leonard Stringfield himself was proposing this as evidence, but he did point out the weakness of only having one witness and no corroborating witnesses or documents whatsoever. And he did point this stuff out. So he's not coming out and saying that this is a slam dunk, smoking gun proof of alien contact. So he does point these things out himself in his writings, just to be fair to Leonard Stringfield. However, he also presents it as something that is a real possibility, which, to be fair, it is. All right, here's an excerpt. In January of 1978, I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base. This is a statement from Morse, by the way. I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey, one evening during the time frame of 0300 hours and 0500 hours. There were a number of UFO sightings in the area over the airfield and Fort Dix Army Camp. I am a security policeman and was on routine patrol at the time. New Jersey State Police and Fort Dix MPs were running code in the direction of Brownsville, New Jersey. A state trooper then entered gate number 5 at the rear of the base, requesting assistance and permission to enter. I was dispatched, and the trooper wanted access to the runway area, which led to the very back of the airfield and connected with a heavily wooded area, which is part of the Dix training area. He informed me that a Fort Dix MP was pursuing a low-flying object which then hovered over his car. He described it as oval-shaped with no details and glowing with a bluish-green color. His radio transmission was cut off. At that time, in front of his police car appeared a thing about 4 feet tall, grayish-brown, fat head. Hey, that's not nice. Long arms. I'm not fat, I'm just big boned. Long arms and a slender body. The MP panicked and fired 5 rounds from his .45 caliber into the thing and 1 round into the object above. The object then fled straight up and joined with 11 others high in the sky. This we all saw, but didn't know the details at the time. Anyway, the thing ran into the woods toward our fence line, and they wanted to look for it. By this time, several patrols were involved. We found the body of the thing near the runway. It had apparently climbed the fence and died while running. It was all of a sudden hush-hush, and no one was allowed near the area. We roped off the area, and AFOSI, that's Air Force Office of Special Investigations, came out and took over. That was the last I saw of it. There was a bad stench coming from it, too, like ammonia smelling, but it wasn't constant. It's misspelled, CONSTENT. It wasn't constant in the air, whatever that means. That day, a team from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base came in a C-141 and went to the area. They crated it in a wooden box, sprayed something over it, and then put it into a bigger metal container. They loaded it in the plane and took off. That was it. Nothing more said, no report made, and we were all told not to have anything to say about it, or we would be court-martialed. Now, you notice there, this is, I believe, his initial letter to Leonard Stringfield. Notice there he said that there was no report made. Interesting. Well, how did we get a report from it then? I don't know. I will be getting out of the Air Force in about 2 months. Do not disclose my name, as I could get into trouble. I am interested in pursuing this and other matters if you need help. Forgive me for not signing this, but I can't take any chances. Please reply to the above address and my parents will forward it to me, or I will be home already. Don't send it here because they monitor all mail closely. And again, I don't want to take any chances. So that's an interesting story. And that's probably the closest you're going to get. I mean, it's pretty much the original witness testimony right there. Although some of that is hearsay because he wasn't there for all of it. But that's the closest we get to the event. If you look around online, there are a ton of different versions of this story that not all the details match. I was able to find this through a publication put out directly through by Leonard Stringfield back in the day. So this is as close as you're going to get to the base story without any embellishments or accidental twisting of the narrative or mistakes made, if you will, in retelling the story. All right, here's another excerpt. In a letter dated November 27, 1980, from his home address, Morse answered as follows. So there's letters going back and forth. There are periods of months or years where Leonard Stringfield sends a letter to Morse and Morse does not respond for whatever reason. And then sometimes out of the blue, he'll send a letter. I'm not going to retell all of those details because it gets a little bogged down and it might be a little too much for what I want to do in this episode. But anyways, in a letter dated November 27, 1980, from his home address, Morse answered as follows. Sorry to have had such a delay in my response to you. I'm sorry to say I did not receive your letter of 27 September 1980. I haven't received any mail since August 1980. I don't know why. I am now out of the service and am home. I am prepared to answer your questions. I believe, however, I told you everything I know, but I'm not sure it was much to go on. But I hope it leads you to someone who knows more about it. I'm sorry I can't recall too many names. The desk sergeant that night was Sergeant capital C, last name only, and he would know much more as fact. That's all I know of his name. However, I do remember that he was rather dedicated and may still be in the USAF. Well, I would like your next response ASAP, and will try to give you my phone number by then. Well, like Yoda says, there is no try, there is only do. So why would you put something like that in there? I will try to give you my phone number. Why not just give him your phone number? I don't know. It's weird. It's weird, man. On December 4, 1980, I sent Morse the following memorandum. Your letter of November 27 arrived yesterday. I was surprised to learn that my letter of September 27 did not reach you. Fortunately, I kept a Xeroxed copy, which I have duplicated and enclosed for your consideration. Hope you can send me your phone number. Enclosed is a gratis copy of my recently published Status Report 2, which shows the scope of my research. Again, Morse, for unknown reasons, did not answer, considering his expressed interest in my research, and even allowing for other personal diversions. I thought that 2.5 months were enough time for him to respond. On February 16th, 1981, I wrote again expressing my concern and asked for a prompt reply as evidence of his sincerity. No answer. Had it not been for Morse's brief letter of November 27, in which he asked me to respond ASAP, or as soon as possible, I would have dismissed his disclosure of the incident as questionable. Something was amiss. Or was the mail sent to his home being lost through negligence, a long shot, or lifted at his post office by directive to the postmaster from one of the intelligence agencies? Whatever the method used to silence Jeffrey Morse, I reasoned, it was effective. All communications ceased, and, like so many other informants in 1980, Morse became a phantom. So the trail kind of dies right there, kind of goes cold. On April 10th, in 1982, Richard Hall, who is investigating this with Leonard Stringfield, another big name in ufology back in the day, he sent a certified letter to Morse, and he offered to meet in person anytime or anywhere to discuss the incident, and he offered money for travel and hotel or whatever was needed. A strange thing is that the certified letter was signed for by Morse on April 12th, 2 days after it was sent, but there was no response forthcoming. It was signed for, and that's it. 17 months later, on September 27, 1983, Hall received another letter from Morse, finally, after, 2-3 years or something, and here's a quote from the letter. I am writing you in regards to your letter 10 April 1982. I'm sorry that it has taken so long to answer your letter. I had to be sure about you and your organization. My mail has not been monitored for some time now. Well, how could you possibly know such a thing? But anyways, my mail has not been monitored for some time now. However, I must not express my information in the letter form. I have been warned, threatened, and I have personally been interrogated as recently as February 1983 in reference to the subject I discussed with Len Stringfield. I also have further information which I know will interest you. I have the opportunity now to travel to D.C. area. So if you wish to contact me again, you should still have my address. Hope to hear from you soon. If, after 2 weeks, I have not heard from you, I will no longer acknowledge my participation with your group, nor will I answer any mail. So he takes months and months to respond, and then when he responds, he says, you only have 2 weeks, otherwise I am going to completely ghost you. So strange. And then once again there was contact, this time by phone, on December 6, 1983. Leonard Stringfield called and was able to speak to him over the phone for the first time. Morse actually called Leonard during dinner time and identified himself by first name only. And he said that he now felt it had been long enough to contact him, and he now felt safe, since it had been a long time since some official visitor had come and warned him about his oath of secrecy. They talked for about 15 minutes, and they covered the basics of the case. But one thing that came out that was new was that 2 days after the incident, he and others on duty at the scene were summoned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for interrogation, and that's not new, and that I mistyped in my notes there. So anyways, they talked about that, about the interrogation at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that they were each transferred to different bases overseas. So not even in the United States, but everybody involved was transferred and redistributed to different places. His assignment was to a new security police squadron in Okinawa, and other people went to the Philippines, Germany, and Korea. And finally, he gives Leonard his phone number. So that's kind of a short history of the correspondence there. Here are some more notes from Leonard's letter here from his report number 4. We have item number 1, the humanoid factor. At varying times during his patrol duty, Morse was within 40 to 70 feet from the prostrate body on the abandoned runway number 5. Never close enough to observe details such as facial features or its hands and feet, he did recall that, under the glare of truck headlights, the skin of the unclad, hairless body was wet, shiny, and snake-like. As reported in his initial letter, the entity was about 4 feet in height, with large head, slender torso, thin arms and legs, and overall of grayish-brown coloration. Unquestionably not human. It was, however, of humanoid stature, fitting the anatomical description so often heard from military sources who have made claim to having seen entities at crash sites, and as defined, coincidentally, by a medical source who allegedly performed an autopsy on a specimen in the early 1950s. And it says, see Figure 3, a drawing by Morse. This drawing was not available on this webpage. And there was a PDF version that I couldn't get to load. Maybe if I looked really hard, I could find that drawing. But I don't know. It's not going to really, it's probably not going to really help the case very much one way or another. Leonard Stringfield really did his homework on this one. He looked for similar UFO sightings in the area, around that same time. This is something I've done myself. If I see a report, I'll dig through whatever files I can find that are contemporary to see if there are similar sightings. And for credible witnesses, quite often there are multiple sightings around that time that match what the witnesses saw. This time, there was no indication of a national flap, and quoting from the document here, there was no concentration of sightings in the New Jersey area at the time. A check into the reports collected and evaluated in the International UFO Reporter from QFOS for that time period showed that 82 reports, according to editor Alan Hendry, were judged to be identifiable or inappropriate. However, 5 were selected for review in the March 1978 issue. So we did have some sightings, but it was by no means a widespread flap, the likes of 1952 or 1966, where there were sometimes dozens of reports a day coming in from all over the country, if not all over the world. He did find one case that caught his attention on January 31st, which is a report in Montvale, New Jersey, involving humanoids. It was reported in the February 1978 issue of the MUFON Journal, which you can find online if you want to look that up yourself. I didn't bother looking up that specific case in detail. Who knows, maybe I'll end up covering it at some point in the future. But there were drawings of the entities. However, they did not really look anything like the entity described by Sergeant Morse, other than the fact that it happened in the same time frame and that it happened in New Jersey and it involved entities. Other than that, it didn't really bear a whole lot of relation to this case. There was another case on January 15th, 1978, 3 days before this incident, where a pilot named Roger and passengers flying from Evansville, Indiana to Lunken Airport in Cincinnati, Ohio, had a UFO encounter. This one, I guess the pilot actually called Leonard, who the pilot, I guess, got Leonard's phone number from the control tower, This guy was a pretty big deal back in the day, I guess, and described a harrowing experience 20 miles north of Louisville, Kentucky, at a 5,500-foot elevation. The pilot, here's a quote from the report, he observed two white lights, one moving back and forth, the other stationary. Watching the one object make a circle, he said it all of a sudden headed for the Sundowner, that's the airplane, on a collision course. To escape its path, he dove 1,000 feet and watched it pass overhead and out of sight. Calling the control tower at Standiford Airport in Louisville, he heard they had received calls from people in the area who saw a UFO. There's also another report of UFOs from January 18th, 1978, from a police officer named Ron James, who was on duty in Erlanger, Kentucky. Here's the quote from the document. His UFO was a large, lime green egg-shaped object flying erratically across Kentucky skies. That sounds pretty similar to this one. Other reports of a green object were also reported that night in northern Kentucky and into Cincinnati, including one, coincidentally, that flew low over the home of the Jones family, causing a moment of terror. The story made big news on the local radio stations and in the headline of the Kentucky edition of the Cincinnati Post. So that's, a little bit of corroborating stories, I guess. That particular one sounds awfully similar, at least the UFO description, but we don't have a full-blown flap going on, and we don't have a ton of similar stories going on. The next update we have is in December 31st, 1984, Morse wrote another letter, quote, I was approached by a person wearing a black suit in my parking lot who mentioned things may go my way if I deny this incident. I just received notice by registered mail that the Department of Justice has decided to make me eligible for hire. I feel these two things are related. So Morse was trying to get a job as a police officer, and they were holding up the process, and then all of a sudden this Men in Black type dude comes along and says, hey, keep your mouth shut, eh? Let's see, eh? Because that's how they talk, right? That's how I imagine they talk. And after that encounter, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they cleared him and he was able to move forward. Could be a coincidence, could be anything at all. Who knows? Now, I did find another witness who is not as well documented, and I'm not sure about the reliability of this witness. This is apparently a guy who came out with some testimony in a book that talked about this incident. So, I don't know. Maybe he's being genuine, maybe he's not, but anytime it's in a book to sell copies and make money, I am always a little bit, just take it with a grain of salt. Anyways, the guy's name is Air Force Major George Filer III, F-I-L-E-R. That does not sound like a real name to me, but so many others don't as well, so who knows. Apparently, he was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base, and he said, quote, our security police went out there and found him at the end of the runway dead. They asked me to brief the general staff, but then after that he was told not to brief the general staff. Major Filer had another strange encounter when he witnessed and chased a UFO flying over England in his airplane, so completely different encounter. I didn't take a whole lot of notes on that guy because the information on that guy is kind of hard to find and probably a little bit flimsy. Who knows? I take that one with a grain of salt. So that is, in a nutshell, the Fort Dix, McGuire Air Force Base alien encounter. Boy sees alien. Boy murders the shit out of alien. The end. Man, boy, whatever. So I have a few questions on this one. Why would the witness be anonymous and then come out with a story that you could easily, if you were the government, who else would he be hiding from? If you were the government, by this guy's story, you would easily be able to identify him. I mean, there's only so many witnesses there, and this guy had a specific role. It would not be that hard to figure out who this guy was. Pretty weird. So that's a question. That's one question I have. Another question is, why are there not more and better descriptions of the UFOs? If they were flying all over the area, you would expect to see more reports of that, but there were not a ton of reports of UFOs in the area. Another question I have is, who were these mysterious blue beret type people that appeared out of nowhere? They arrived on scene very quickly, indicating that they were probably stationed on base or, stationed at one of the bases. But where were they stationed? Who were they? Did they wear invisibility suits most of the time? I don't know. It's a strange detail. I've never heard of blue beret mysterious soldiers before that come to investigate stuff. That's the first one I ever heard of it. And it seems a little strange to me that somebody who's military police, whose job it is to go police things and check stuff out and make sure the base is safe, I assume it involves a lot of patrolling the perimeters and whatever. That's the sort of person who would probably be familiar with every type of unit stationed there, and in fact would probably be familiar with a lot of the people stationed at the base. However, in this case, he didn't know any of the people there, did not recognize them, and in fact did not even recognize these blue beret people at all as being stationed on the base. Why is that? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Who knows? Another question I have is, why would an alien get out in front of a car, in front of an armed guard? Wouldn't aliens know in advance? Wouldn't they do some scouting of the area to find out what our capabilities are? Wouldn't they be aware of basic physics and understand that it's probably a really bad idea to stand in front of a car? Wouldn't it be a really bad idea to show yourself to a primitive species who is armed with a lethal weapon? I don't know. It's almost like the alien didn't know what a car was, didn't know about physics, and did not know what a weapon was either. Why? Don't know. Another question I have is, if Morse's mail was being monitored and intercepted, why were communications let through? If the government was so concerned with silencing him, why did they allow him to communicate with Leonard Stringfield? If Morse sent letters with details of the event and he signed a secrecy agreement, why was nothing done to persecute him, to court-martial him, or to put him in jail in violation of that agreement? It would not have been difficult at all to find his communications with Leonard Stringfield, especially because those were published. This story was published as it unfolded in several different publications. You can find those online if you look hard enough. So these are some of the questions I have about the case. When you read through all of the documentation, it seems like Morse is kind of LARPing here, and it bears a lot of resemblance to Lou Elizondo's case, where you have a former military person coming out as a whistleblower, saying things that would almost certainly violate oaths that they had made in the past. I don't know. There's a certain pattern here that is just getting my spidey senses tingling. There are certain details to this case that I find incredible and unbelievable. For me, it just kind of doesn't really add up. I'm not saying that it's all bullshit or that there's nothing here. I am saying that we only have one witness who's giving us all of this information. We have no corroboration from any other party whatsoever, and I am very skeptical of this story. I'm not willing to dismiss it outright, but I am saying that I don't really believe it either. So that's kind of where I stand on this one, and I would like to also point out that before this case, Leonard Stringfield did have another witness who came forward with a case of, I didn't take notes on it, but it was crash retrieval or EBE or something like that. And it ended up being a hoax. And going over the documents, there were certain errors that proved that it was a hoax over time as the story unfolded. The documentation in this case seemed to be a lot better and more consistent. So it is a lot more solid in that regard. That's why I don't really want to dismiss it outright. However, there are problems with the story, and there are some questions that I would like answered, such as those I mentioned before. So that's kind of all I have for this case. Now, when I'm searching, quite often I'll use a certain keyword. In this case, it was McGuire. When I'm searching through it, like I mentioned before on the show, that I have millions of pages of PDF documents, all related to the UFO topic, tons and tons of stuff, all provided by the hard work of Isaac Coy, who I've mentioned on our last bonus episode. I talked about Isaac Coy briefly and his work in the Above Top Secret forums and all that stuff. So I mentioned him, and he put together this repository of documents. I search through there oftentimes when I have a case where it's really hard to find good information like this one. I'll search through there, and in this case, I found a couple of really good bibliographies that led me to other documents. It said, you just search for McGuire and it'll have a reference to something talking about McGuire Air Force Base. And that's how I was able to find these releases by Leonard Stringfield. But sometimes when you're searching for these things, you find something with a keyword that is completely unrelated to the case at hand. Well, pretty much all the time, unless you're searching for a really unusual or niche word, you might not find anything else. But in this case, McGuire is a fairly common word or name, so I found all kinds of really interesting stuff. Here's a quote, just a random quote of one of the things that I thought was somewhat interesting that has nothing to do with this case whatsoever, but I thought it was fun, so I'll mention it here. Here's a quote. A fourth category harkens back to Men in Black, as witnesses report shadowy, evil figures, a tall man who stared into a kitchen window but left no tracks in the snow, or the piercing, malevolent eyes seen by Betty and Becky Andreessen. I think I've talked about all those things on the show. The case of Bill McGuire and Nora Johnson tops the list with perhaps the eeriest entry. After a night of weird experiences, the witnesses napped for a short while and then drove off again, soon to catch sight of a camper involved in the experiences of the night before. As they passed the camper, Nora saw two beings in black leather suits, headless beings, possessed of only shadowy outlines of heads and evil Cheshire cat-like grins. The camper drove out of sight around a curve and never reappeared, apparently vanishing. And that's from UFO Abductions, The Measure of a Mystery, Volume 1, Comparative Study of Abduction Reports by Thomas E. Bullard, for the Fund for UFO Research, otherwise known as FUFOR, F-U-F-O-R. I thought that was a fun little story with just a little blurb. If you find that document and you read it, there's more to it than that. There's more details available. But that was just a really interesting description with beings, leather-clad beings with shadow heads and Cheshire cat-like grins. What are we talking about here? This is weird. This is really weird stuff. And sometimes, you don't always have to believe something for it to be a fun story or for it to spark your imagination. Anyways, that's all I've got for you guys this time. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, keep it strange.